Rain fell slowly over the quiet spaceport town. Cold wind moved through the empty streets, and the yellow lights above the road flickered in the storm. Inside a small metal repair shop, a human mechanic named Daniel Carter was finishing his long day of work. Daniel was a simple man who fixed broken machines for travelers and cargo pilots. Old engines, damaged robots, cracked navigation screens, anything that needed repair came to his small shop. Business was never very good, but Daniel worked hard and stayed honest. That night he was tired. His hands were covered in oil and metal dust, and his back hurt from lifting heavy engine parts all day. He turned off the last tool on his work table and looked around the quiet shop. "Another long day," he said softly to himself. Outside the rain grew stronger, hitting the metal roof with a steady sound. Daniel grabbed his old coat and walked toward the door to close the shop for the night. Just as he reached the door, he heard something strange, a very small crying sound. Daniel stopped moving and listened carefully. The crying came again, weak and soft, almost lost in the sound of rain and wind. At first Daniel thought it was just a street animal, maybe a small cat hiding from the storm, but something about the sound felt different. He slowly opened the door and stepped outside into the cold rain. The street was empty. Water ran along the sides of the road, and the spaceport lights glowed far away in the distance. Then the crying sound came again. This time it came from behind a stack of old cargo boxes near the alley. Daniel walked slowly toward the sound, his boots splashing in the puddles. "Hello?" he called out. No answer came, only another soft cry. Daniel moved one of the cargo boxes aside, and suddenly he froze. Sitting on the ground was a very small alien child. The child looked no older than 5 years. She had soft silver fur, small fox-like ears, and large glowing eyes that reflected the streetlight. Her clothes were wet from the rain, and she was holding a small broken toy close to her chest. The toy looked strange, made of glowing metal and tiny floating parts that slowly blinked with fading light. The little alien girl looked up at Daniel with fear and hope in her eyes. She spoke in broken words through a weak translator device around her neck. "Please, help fix toy." Daniel blinked in surprise. He had seen aliens before at the spaceport, but never a child alone like this. He looked around the empty street again, expecting worried parents or guards to appear, but the street stayed silent. "Where are your parents, kid?" Daniel asked gently. The little alien girl only hugged the broken toy tighter and shook her head slowly. Daniel sighed and scratched the back of his head. He was not good with children, and he definitely did not expect to find a lost alien child outside his shop at midnight. But the girl was cold, scared, and alone in the rain. Daniel could not walk away from that. "All right," he said finally. "Come inside before you freeze." The little alien child followed him carefully into the warm repair shop. She looked around the room with curious glowing eyes as machines hummed softly and lights flickered on the walls. Daniel took the strange toy from her small hands and placed it on his work table. Up close, the toy looked even stranger. Tiny alien circuits moved slowly inside the device, and a small floating animal shape tried to form but kept breaking apart. Daniel whistled quietly. "Well, that's not normal," he said. The little girl watched him carefully, waiting with hope in her eyes. Daniel picked up his repair tools and began opening the small device. He had fixed many strange machines before, but this one was different from anything he had ever seen. Still, a mechanic was a mechanic. If something was broken, he would try to fix it. But Daniel did not know something very important. Far above the dark clouds of the planet, hidden in silent space, a massive alien fleet was searching for the missing child. Warships larger than cities scanned every corner of the planet, and slowly, they were getting closer to the small repair shop in the rain, and to the human mechanic who had no idea that the crying child in his shop was far more important than he could imagine. The rain continued outside the small repair shop, tapping softly on the metal roof. Inside, the warm yellow lights of the workshop glowed over shelves full of tools, wires, engines, and broken machines waiting to be repaired. Daniel stood at his work table while the little alien girl watched him carefully from a small chair nearby. Her silver ears moved slightly every time a tool made a sound. She looked nervous but hopeful. holding her small hands together while Daniel examined the strange toy. The device was unlike anything Daniel had seen before. It looked like a toy animal, maybe a small glowing fox, but the parts inside were extremely advanced. Tiny pieces of metal floated slowly inside a small transparent core, blinking with soft blue light, but something inside was clearly damaged. The floating pieces kept losing power and falling apart. Daniel scratched his chin and leaned closer. "Well, kid, this is not a normal toy," he said quietly. The little alien girl tilted her head, not understanding every word, but listening closely. Daniel picked up a small scanner from his tool shelf and passed it over the toy. The screen immediately flashed strange symbols and energy readings he had never seen before. "That's interesting," Daniel muttered. The energy source inside the toy was incredibly powerful for such a small device. In fact, it was more advanced than most machines used in the spaceport. Daniel looked toward the girl. "Where did you get this thing?" he asked gently. The girl thought for a moment, then pointed up toward the sky. "Home ship," she said through the weak translator. Daniel slowly nodded. That explained why the technology looked so strange. It probably came from a powerful alien civilization. He carefully opened the toy using a small magnetic screwdriver. The shell slowly separated with a soft click, revealing the delicate floating circuits inside. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. Each tiny piece looked like a miniature computer processor, all working together to create the glowing animal shape. "Okay, this is going to take a little time," he said calmly. The little alien girl waited patiently while swinging her legs under the chair. For the first time since he found her, she looked a little less scared. Daniel began working carefully, adjusting tiny wires and reconnecting damaged circuits. Minutes passed, then an hour. Outside, the rain slowly became weaker, but inside the repair shop, Daniel continued working under the bright table light. The girl slowly grew sleepy. She rested her head on the table while watching Daniel's hands move with careful skill. Daniel had repaired thousands of machines in his life: cargo engines, broken security drones, damaged starship panels, but this tiny toy was one of the most complex devices he had ever touched. Still, Daniel enjoyed the challenge. Finally, he reconnected the last floating circuit and sealed the toy's outer shell. "All right, let's see if this works," he said quietly. He pressed a small glowing button on the device. For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly the toy lit up with bright blue light. The tiny floating pieces inside moved smoothly and formed the shape of a small glowing fox. The little creature floated gently above the table and wagged its glowing tail. The alien girl's eyes became wide with joy. She jumped off the chair and clapped her hands happily. "Friend." She laughed. The glowing fox circled around her head playfully, making soft musical sounds. Daniel smiled slightly, feeling proud of the repair. "Well, kid, looks like it works again," he said. But at that exact moment, something unexpected happened. Across the room, Daniel's old space radar monitor suddenly turned on by itself. A loud warning beep filled the shop. Daniel frowned and walked toward the screen. "What now?" he muttered. The monitor showed dozens of flashing signals entering the planet's upper orbit. Then dozens turned into hundreds. Daniel's eyes widened slowly. Large unknown ships were appearing all across the radar map, ships far bigger than normal cargo vessels. Military size. Daniel walked to the window and looked up at the cloudy night sky. At first he saw nothing. Then slowly, faint shadows began to appear above the clouds. Huge shapes moving silently in orbit. Daniel swallowed nervously. Kid," he said slowly, "you wouldn't happen to know anything about a giant fleet in the sky, would you?" The little alien girl simply hugged her floating toy happily, completely unaware that an entire alien armada had just arrived above the planet searching for her, and that very soon they would find the small repair shop where she was hiding with the human mechanic who fixed her toy. Morning arrived slowly over the small spaceport town, but this morning felt very different. The rain had stopped during the night, and gray clouds still covered most of the sky. But people walking outside quickly noticed something strange. Huge shadows were moving far above the clouds. At first, people thought it was just a group of cargo ships passing through orbit, But then the shapes became clearer. They were not cargo ships. They were massive warships. Long black vessels with glowing blue engines slowly filled the sky above the planet. Within an hour, the entire town was talking about it. News stations started broadcasting emergency messages. Government security forces rushed to their bases. Fighter ships began launching from the local defense station. Everyone was asking the same question: why is a huge alien fleet here? Meanwhile, inside his small repair shop, Daniel Carter had no idea how serious the situation was becoming. He was standing in his tiny kitchen area making breakfast, a simple meal of toast and eggs. Across the table, the little alien girl sat happily. Her glowing toy fox floated slowly around her head, making soft musical sounds. Every time the toy moved, she laughed quietly. Daniel placed a plate on the table and looked at her carefully. "You know, I still don't even know your name," he said. The small alien girl thought for a moment. Then she pointed at herself proudly. "Lumi," she said. Daniel nodded slowly. "Well, Lumi, I'm Daniel," he said with a small smile. Lumi tried to repeat his name, but it sounded funny through her translator. "Daniel," she said happily. Daniel chuckled softly. But suddenly the calm morning was broken by a loud sound outside. A deep roaring engine noise shook the street. Daniel walked toward the shop window and looked outside. 3 large armored vehicles had stopped in front of the repair shop. They were not human vehicles. Their metal surface was smooth and dark, covered with glowing alien symbols. A group of tall alien soldiers stepped out. They wore black armor and carried energy weapons that glowed with soft blue light. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "That can't be good," he whispered. Behind him, Lumi continued playing with her floating toy, completely unaware of the danger outside. The front door of the repair shop slowly opened with a metallic creak. Heavy footsteps entered the building. Daniel stood still as 4 alien soldiers walked inside. They were tall and strong, with silver armor covering their bodies. Their glowing eyes scanned the room carefully. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the soldiers stepped forward. He looked at Daniel and spoke through a clear translator voice. "Human. This location was detected during our search." Daniel raised his hand slightly, trying to stay calm. "Search for what?" he asked. Before the soldier could answer, something small moved behind Daniel. Lumi walked into the room holding her glowing toy fox. The moment the soldiers saw her, everything changed. All 4 soldiers suddenly stopped moving. Their eyes widened in shock. Then something even more surprising happened. The soldiers quickly lowered their weapons, and one by one, they knelt on one knee. Daniel blinked in confusion. "Wait. What?" he said quietly. The lead soldier lowered his head respectfully toward the little alien girl. His voice sounded emotional through the translator. "Princess Lumi, we have finally found you." Daniel slowly turned his head toward the small alien child standing beside him. Lumi looked back at him with her usual innocent smile. As if nothing strange had happened at all, Daniel rubbed his forehead slowly. "Princess?" he repeated in disbelief. Outside the repair shop, the sky was now filled with the shadows of enormous alien warships. Thousands of soldiers were searching the planet, and the most powerful fleet in the sector had arrived for only one reason: to rescue the lost daughter of their empress, and somehow, without knowing it, a simple human mechanic had been protecting her all night. Daniel looked at Lumi again and sighed quietly. "Well, that explains the fleet," he said under his breath. But he still had no idea that something even bigger was about to happen, because the Empress herself was already on her way down to the planet. And very soon, she would stand face to face with the human who fixed her daughter's toy. Inside the small repair shop, the air suddenly felt very heavy and quiet. Daniel stood near the work table, while the tall alien soldiers remained kneeling on one knee. Their weapons were lowered, and their heads were slightly bowed toward the small alien girl. Lumi looked confused by the serious mood in the room. She held her glowing toy fox and looked at the soldiers with curiosity instead of fear. The toy floated around her slowly, leaving soft blue light in the air. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, still trying to understand what was happening. "Okay, hold on," he said slowly. "You just called her Princess?" The lead alien soldier stood up carefully. His armor reflected the workshop lights as he stepped forward. He looked at Lumi with deep respect, then turned his attention back to Daniel. "Yes, human," the translator voice said calmly. "This child is Princess Lumi Arian, daughter of the Galactic Empress of the Velari Empire." Daniel stared at him for a long moment. Then he slowly looked down at Lumi again. The little alien girl simply smiled and waved at him. As if nothing about this situation was strange at all, Daniel sighed softly. "Of course she is," he muttered. The commander continued speaking. "Our fleet has searched for the princess for 3 planetary days. Our royal ship was attacked by space pirates during travel. The princess escaped using an emergency pod, but the pod disappeared during the crash landing." Daniel folded his arms, listening carefully. "So she landed here?" he asked. The alien commander nodded slowly. "Yes," he replied. "Our scanners tracked the crash signal to this region, but the pod was heavily damaged. For many hours we believed the princess might be lost." Lumi walked closer to Daniel and gently held the edge of his jacket. She looked up at him and spoke in her soft, broken translator voice. "Pod, big fire. Loud crash," she said quietly. Daniel looked down at her with concern. "You crashed here alone?" he asked gently. She nodded slowly. "Scared," she added. Daniel felt a small pain in his chest. No child should have to experience something like that alone. He glanced back at the alien soldiers. "Well, she ended up outside my shop in the rain," he explained. "She was crying and holding that broken toy." Lumi lifted the glowing fox happily when she heard that. "Daniel fixed friend," she said proudly. The alien commander's eyes moved toward the floating toy. He stepped closer and examined it carefully. For a moment, his serious expression softened with surprise. "You repaired this?" he asked Daniel. Daniel shrugged slightly. "It was broken, so I fixed it," he said simply. The commander exchanged looks with the other soldiers. They seemed impressed. "That toy is a royal companion device," the commander explained. "It is built using advanced Velari technology. Few outside our empire would understand its systems." Daniel smiled a little. "Well, machines are machines," he replied calmly. "If they break, someone has to fix them." For a moment, the room was quiet again. Then the commander placed his fist over his chest respectfully. "Human Daniel Carter," he said, "you unknowingly protected the heir of our empire. Your actions will not be forgotten." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I didn't protect a princess," he replied. "I just helped a scared kid." Lumi hugged his arm happily when she heard that. The glowing toy fox floated around them, both in playful circles. Outside the repair shop, the sound of large engines suddenly filled the air. The ground trembled slightly beneath their feet. Daniel looked toward the window again. A massive shadow slowly passed over the building. The alien commander immediately straightened his posture. His voice became more serious. "The Empress has arrived," he said. Daniel blinked slowly. "The Empress?" he repeated. The commander nodded. "Our ruler would never remain in orbit while her child is on the surface. Her royal ship has just landed in the city." Outside, the sky darkened as a gigantic alien battleship slowly descended through the clouds. Its engines glowed like small suns above the town. Citizens across the city watched in fear and amazement as the enormous vessel landed near the spaceport. Back inside the repair shop, Daniel suddenly felt very nervous. He looked down at Lumi. She did not seem worried at all. In fact, she looked excited. "Mom coming," she said happily. Daniel took a slow, deep breath. He had fixed machines for many strange customers before, but this was the first time he was about to meet a galactic empress. And somehow, he had a feeling this meeting was going to change his quiet life forever. Outside the small repair shop, the entire city had fallen into silence. People stood in the streets staring up at the sky above them. The enormous alien battleship slowly descended through the clouds like a dark mountain moving through the air. Its engines glowed bright blue, lighting the buildings below. Wind from the powerful thrusters pushed dust and debris across the streets. No one in the city had ever seen a ship that large before. Government soldiers and security forces quickly surrounded the landing area near the spaceport, but they kept their distance. Everyone understood one thing very clearly. This fleet was far too powerful to challenge. Inside Daniel's repair shop, The sound of the ship's engines made the walls vibrate slightly. Daniel looked through the dusty window and shook his head slowly. "Well, that's definitely not a normal visitor," he muttered. Behind him, Lumi stood on a chair trying to see outside. Her glowing toy fox floated happily beside her. "Big ship," she said excitedly. Daniel looked back at her, still struggling to believe everything that had happened in the last few hours. "Yeah, kid. Big ship," he replied. Near the door, the alien soldiers stood perfectly still like statues. Their commander was speaking quietly through a small communication device in his armor. After a moment, he turned toward Daniel. "The Empress will arrive here shortly," he said respectfully. Daniel blinked. "Here? In my shop?" he asked in disbelief. The commander nodded. "Her Majesty wishes to see the human who protected her daughter." Daniel sighed and looked around his messy workshop. Tools were scattered across the tables, oil stains covered the floor, and half-repaired machines sat in every corner. "This place is not exactly royal palace material," he said quietly. Lumi giggled softly. She jumped off the chair and ran toward the door. "Mom coming," she repeated happily. A few minutes later, the sound of vehicles stopped outside the shop. Through the window, Daniel saw several sleek alien transports landing in the street. Rows of elite guards stepped out first, forming a protective line around the entrance. Their armor shined with silver light, far more advanced than the soldiers who had arrived earlier. Then one final transport landed slowly in front of the repair shop. The door of the transport opened with a soft hiss. Everyone inside the shop became completely silent. A tall figure stepped down from the transport. She wore long white and silver robes that moved gently in the wind. A crown of glowing crystal rested above her silver hair. Her presence alone made the air feel powerful and calm at the same time. It was clear to everyone watching. This was the Empress of the Velari Empire. The guards quickly opened the shop door. The Empress stepped inside slowly, her calm eyes observing every detail of the small room. For a moment she said nothing. Then Lumi suddenly ran forward with excitement. "Mom!" she shouted happily. The serious expression on the Empress's face disappeared instantly. She knelt down and opened her arms. Lumi jumped into them and hugged her tightly. "My star." "You are safe," the Empress whispered softly. Her voice was gentle but carried natural authority. She held her daughter for a long moment before standing again. Then her eyes moved toward Daniel. The room became very quiet. Daniel felt every alien guard in the room watching him. He cleared his throat awkwardly and raised one hand in a small wave. Hello," he said nervously. The Empress studied him carefully. Her glowing eyes were calm but incredibly sharp, as if she could see every detail about him in a single moment. "You are the human called Daniel Carter," she said. Her voice was smooth and powerful, yet not unfriendly. Daniel nodded slowly. "That's me," he replied. Lumi ran back to Daniel and grabbed his hand proudly. "Daniel, fixed friend," she said, lifting the glowing toy fox into the air. The floating toy circled around the Empress playfully. The Empress watched it for a moment, then looked back at Daniel. "You repaired my daughter's royal companion device," she said calmly. Daniel shrugged slightly. "It was broken." "And she looked really sad," he answered. "So I fixed it." For a moment the Empress remained silent. Then something surprising happened. She slowly placed her hand over her chest and bowed her head slightly toward Daniel. Every soldier in the room immediately followed her example. Daniel's eyes widened in shock. The most powerful ruler in the sector had just bowed to a simple mechanic. "You cared for my child without knowing who she was," the Empress said softly. "In our empire, such kindness carries great honor." Daniel scratched his head awkwardly. "I just helped a kid in the rain," he replied. But the Empress looked at him with a small, thoughtful smile. "And sometimes," she said quietly, "the smallest actions change the fate of entire worlds." Daniel had a strange feeling that this moment was only the beginning of something much bigger than he ever expected. The repair shop remained quiet after the Empress finished speaking. The sound of distant ships outside could still be heard through the walls, but inside the room everyone stood in respectful silence. Daniel felt very uncomfortable with so many powerful people watching him. He was just a mechanic who spent most of his days fixing broken engines and cleaning oil from his hands. Being surrounded by royal guards and a galactic ruler was not something he ever expected. Lumi, however, seemed completely relaxed. She stood beside Daniel while her glowing toy fox floated in slow circles above her head. The small creature made soft musical sounds as it moved through the air. The Empress gently placed her hand on Lumi's shoulder, making sure her daughter was truly safe. Then she looked back at Daniel again. "You showed kindness to my child during a moment of great danger," she said calmly. Few beings in the galaxy would have acted so selflessly. Daniel shifted his weight slightly and crossed his arms. "I didn't know she was important," he answered honestly. "She was just a scared kid standing in the rain." The Empress nodded slowly. "That is exactly why your action matters," she replied. "Kindness without expecting reward is the rarest form of honor." Behind her, one of the royal guards stepped forward carrying a small silver case. The guard opened it carefully and revealed a glowing crystal medal and a thin credit chip. The soft blue light from the metal filled the small workshop. Daniel looked at it with surprise. "What is that?" he asked. The Empress stepped closer and lifted the medal from the case. "This is the Star of Velari, one of the highest honors in our empire," she explained. "It is given only to those who protect the royal family or perform acts of great bravery." Daniel blinked several times. "I think you might be giving that to the wrong person," he said nervously. "I didn't fight pirates or save a starship. I just repaired a toy." Lumi quickly shook her head and pointed at him proudly. "Daniel saved friend," she said happily. The Empress smiled slightly at her daughter's words. Then she stepped forward and gently placed the medal into Daniel's hands. "You restored more than a toy," she said quietly. "You restored the smile of my child during her darkest moment." Daniel stared down at the glowing medal in silence. He had never received any award in his life before. For a moment he did not know what to say. Then the Empress gestured toward the credit chip in the case. "This device contains a financial reward from the royal treasury," she added. Daniel looked at the small chip carefully. "How much are we talking about?" he asked cautiously. The alien commander standing nearby answered calmly. "Enough to purchase an entire spaceport station." Daniel nearly dropped the chip. "You're joking," he said quickly, but the commander simply shook his head. "This is a small expression of gratitude from the Empire," he replied. Daniel rubbed his forehead slowly, trying to process everything. Just yesterday, he had been worrying about paying rent for his tiny repair shop. Now he was holding enough credits to change his entire life. Lumi gently tugged on his sleeve. "Happy?" she asked with a curious smile. Daniel looked down at her and laughed softly. "Yeah, kid. I guess I am," he answered. But the Empress was not finished yet. She studied Daniel carefully for a moment before speaking again. "There is another matter," she said thoughtfully. Daniel looked up, slightly worried again. "What kind of matter?" he asked. The Empress glanced toward Lumi, who was now playing with the floating toy fox again. "My daughter has taken a liking to you," the Empress explained. "She rarely trusts strangers so quickly." Lumi suddenly ran over and hugged Daniel's leg again. "Daniel, friend," she declared happily. The guards in the room exchanged quiet, amused looks. Daniel smiled awkwardly, unsure how to respond. The Empress folded her hands behind her back and continued speaking. "In our culture, bonds formed during moments of danger are considered very meaningful," she said. "If you are willing, I would like to offer you something more than a reward." Daniel raised an eyebrow with curiosity. "What exactly are you offering?" he asked. The Empress looked directly into his eyes before answering. "A place among our allies," she said calmly. "A human who shows such kindness and skill could become a valuable friend to the Velari Empire." Daniel stood quietly for a moment, realizing that his simple life as a small-town mechanic had just taken a very unexpected turn. And somehow, it had all started because he helped a crying child in the rain. The small repair shop felt strangely quiet after the Empress finished speaking. Outside, the massive alien fleet still filled the sky above the city. Ships larger than mountains floated silently in orbit, while smaller patrol ships moved through the clouds. People across the city were still watching in shock, wondering what had brought such power to their peaceful world. Inside the shop, however, the mood was calm. Daniel stood near his workbench, holding the glowing metal and the credit chip the Empress had given him. He still could not fully believe everything that had happened in just one night. Only yesterday, he had been a normal mechanic fixing broken cargo engines. Now he was standing in front of a galactic ruler while holding one of the highest honors of an alien empire. Daniel slowly looked up at the Empress again. "You said, 'A place among your allies,'" he said carefully. "What exactly does that mean for someone like me?" The Empress stood tall and calm, her silver robe shining softly under the workshop lights. "It means friendship," she replied. "The Valari Empire does not forget those who show honor. If you ever need assistance, protection, or resources, our empire will answer your call." Daniel raised his eyebrows slightly. "That sounds like a pretty serious promise," he said. The alien commander standing nearby spoke firmly. "Our empire keeps every promise we make." Daniel gave a small, thoughtful nod. He placed the metal carefully on the workbench and looked around his messy repair shop again. Broken engines, scattered tools, and old metal shelves filled the room just like they had yesterday. Yet somehow the place now felt different. Lumi suddenly ran across the room toward him. Her glowing toy fox floated quickly behind her, leaving soft blue light in the air. She stopped in front of Daniel and looked up at him with excitement. "Daniel, come ship?" she asked hopefully. Daniel chuckled softly. "I think your mom has enough guests on that giant ship already," he replied. But Lumi shook her head quickly. "Visit," she insisted. The Empress watched the moment with quiet amusement. "My daughter rarely asks for visitors," she said gently. "You have clearly made a strong impression on her." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "I guess we became friends," he said. The Empress nodded slowly. "And friendship should be respected," she replied. She then turned slightly toward the commander, who immediately understood and stepped forward. "Human Daniel Carter," the commander said formally. "By order of the Empress, you are now recognized as a friend of the Valari Empire. This title grants you safe passage to all Valari territories and the protection of our fleet if you ever require it." Daniel stared at him in disbelief for a moment. "That's a pretty big title for a mechanic," he said quietly. The commander gave a small respectful nod. "Kindness is never a small thing," he replied. Lumi tugged on Daniel's sleeve again. "Promise visit," she said with a hopeful smile. Daniel looked down at her and smiled warmly. "All right, kid," he said. "I promise I'll visit someday." Lumi clapped happily and lifted her glowing toy fox into the air. The little floating creature spun around the room, playfully while making cheerful musical sounds. Outside, the alien fleet had begun preparing for departure. One by one, the giant ships slowly moved back toward the upper atmosphere, their engines lighting the sky like distant stars. The Empress walked toward the door of the repair shop and paused for a moment. She looked back at Daniel one last time. "Human Daniel Carter," she said calmly. "The galaxy is a very large and dangerous place. But today, it became a little better because of your kindness." Daniel smiled slightly and gave a small wave. "Well, if you ever have more broken toys, you know where to find me," he replied jokingly. For the first time since arriving, the Empress allowed herself a small laugh. Then she stepped outside with her guards and returned to the royal transport. Within minutes, the vehicles lifted into the sky and flew toward the massive battleship waiting above the city. Daniel stood in the doorway of his shop watching the enormous fleet slowly disappear into space. The morning sky gradually returned to normal. Soon the town would go back to its quiet routine. But Daniel knew one thing had changed forever. Somewhere out in the galaxy, a powerful empire now considered him a trusted friend, and it had all started on a rainy night, when a tired human mechanic decided to help a crying alien child fix her broken toy.